Hi everyone, this is Blake Anderson, a videographer here in Toronto, Ontario. And in this tutorial, I'm going to walk through how I created this Instagram video at the CNE when I was with a couple of models and shot this video. And I'm going to emphasize primarily in this video my post-production workflow in terms of using different assets that I add to the treatment of the video. So I'll walk through first how I edited the video in terms of the sequence, and then I'll talk further about using such software as Eagle software, which is basically a viewer that allows you to store all your assets so that you can quickly view them and get access to them, so that when you're editing, you can quickly drag and drop them into your timeline or your composition. So in this video, I'm going to walk through the different elements of my post-production, how I basically edited this Instagram video that I created. So stay tuned as I walk you through my post-production workflow. So in terms of how I shot this video, again, I shot at the CNE here in Toronto, and I had two models, and I shot this on my A7 IV, shooting it in flat for the most part. As it got to nighttime, I changed it from picture profile 8, which is a flat profile, so it's S-Log 2. And then I transitioned to F11, which I've set up as a cine tone, so that way I don't have to overexpose. Typically at nighttime, you don't want to add any additional noise that you don't have to. So basically the bad noise that you find in the shadows when the sensor can't pick up those shadows. By shooting in different picture profiles, sets up your image so that you can get the most of it. I've done other videos where I've talked about the best image you can get out of the Sony a7 IV, so definitely check out that video. But the one thing to remember is when I'm shooting for the Instagram story, the format is in vertical dimensions, so I shoot the camera in a vertical way. Some cameras now have open gates, so it allows you to crop easily in post. But in order to capture the most of the sensor, it's the best idea is to capture it vertically. That way you don't have to crop or create any challenges in post. Once I have that video, so that's the image in terms of the flat image, I will then get those clips and I'll add them to my timeline, my Final Cut Pro timeline. And I'll set it up as vertical story dimensions. So that's the opposite of 4K. So it's 2180 by 3460, and that way when I add the image and the videos to the timeline, they will naturally go into that format. One aspect of that too is that I changed the clips so that I create automatic speed. So if there's any clips I shot in 60 frames, it will convert those 60 frames automatically to a 24 frame timeline. That way I don't have to go through each clip and change the timing. That's just a quick way to get a faster workflow. And then typically I'm going to add the different edits and make the sequence I want to. At least my workflow is I will get what I consider some of the best shots. I want to ensure that the clips are stable. So typically I'm stabilizing a lot of these shots and using Final Cut stabilizing feature, which generally does a pretty good job. Although sometimes there's a bit of wonkiness if it's the way it's shot, or there's just too much movement. So that's why I have to ensure that, each clip, the stabilizing is working, right? Because you don't want to have any of that wonkiness in post. Capturing the best shots, I will then use that timeline. So it's a bit of a longer video. I tend to color grade it then, instead of maybe doing it entirely in the last step, as a typical workflow might do. But I find if I'm just getting the image quality in terms of ensuring that the clips are color graded, and I just export that as a H.264 file, that way it's just much easier to work with when I'm editing. Then I'll export it as a complete baked-in image in terms of the color grade, and then I will add it to another timeline and another project file and start chopping and editing from there. But the reason why I do that is just because it's easier on the computer, and I find I just want to get the image the way I think it seems like a good image, and then start focusing more on the sequence of the edit. But if I was doing a bigger project, I would likely keep it all flat, and then at the end as typical, you get a color grader or you grade yourself after you've done all the different sequence edits. One thing to mention in my Final Cut workflow is that I'm using their automatic feature. You can auto adjust the color, light in the image. It automatically adjusts the exposure, highlights, and the different shadows and aspects of the image. And I find generally that does a good job of making sure that the image is its optimal quality. Sometimes you might want to adjust it further, but on top of that, I'm adding adjustment layers. Typically, I have about 4 or 5 adjustment layers. And then I'm going to use Maxon 1. So that's my color grading program and plugins that I use. And so typically I'm using Colorista as my first adjustment layer and adding a LUT. So that LUT converts the S-Log2 flat profile to a Rec 709. And then from there, I'm also might do an S-curve on the just to make the shadows a bit darker and the darks a bit darker. And then tend to, create an S-curve where the highlights and the midtones are up a bit. So that's generally a pleasing image in terms of getting the most of the dynamic range of your camera. But you obviously don't want to overdo it, so it's subtle. But from there, I'm adding or actually first, the next adjustment is I'll use Magic Bullet looks through Maxon 1. And using Maxon 1's looks, I'm going to add the different treatments I want. Typically, I'm relying on Blockbusters. They have 3 options and 3 categories of LUTs that add different adjustments to your image. Typically, I'll rely on one of their presets, and then once I'm out of Magic Bullet looks, I'll tend to dim down the strength of the Magic Bullet looks, just because you don't want it to degrade the image too much. I find that the subtler the better, so typically I'm relying on maybe 20 to 30% or sometimes even lower. And then from there, I'm going to add to my third adjustment layer is Mojo. So that's another plugin from Maxon 1 in their Magic Bullet suite of tools. And Mojo just adds a nice, cool, I would say cinematic and film look that gives a very good teal and orange look to your image. And from there, I'm also then finally going to use Renoiser. So Renoiser is a plugin that I add to the 4th adjustment layer. And that way I can add impression proofing. That way when I'm exporting it, it does its best, I think, to really create a bit of, I guess it adds noise and allows you to sharpen the image more so that when you are compressing it finally to, I guess, Instagram, right, then it's doing a pretty good job of baking in some of the static the noise in the image so that you're getting a sharper image. So that is just to kind of explain generally my editing workflow in terms of how I'm first color grading the image. I'm getting the best shots and then cutting to the best shots. And then once I got a composition and I like those different shots, I will export it with those 4 adjustment layers. And then I'll export that and I tend to then import it again to Final Cut Pro, where I add to the image by adding different assets. What I'll do is I'll first get a better sequence. This is when I'll add some audio, some music to the video. And then I'll cut to the video. I'll get the song and cut to the beat. Once I have the composition, the cuts that I like, typically then I'm going to, at least in this video I did at the C&E with these 2 models, I'm going to add different film treatment and like film burns and different assets that I can make the image a little more of a vintage film look. And so in this project, what I use is I use Eagle. So Eagle's a software that allows you to store your assets on your Mac. And you could use your Finder, and I think a lot of people tend to use their Finder to store their assets. And you can obviously do that in Viewer, and you can glimpse what your different assets are. But I found long ago that it's better to have all your assets in one place. And I find Eagle software does a great job. You can tag them, you can star them. You can do different aspects to categorizing your assets, as well as there's many different features of that program. In this video, I'm not going to really walk through all those different elements, but I just want to highlight that I'm using Eagle software to store all the assets and things I've got from online in terms of different film treatments. And I'm sure that if you know yourself are a creator or a videographer, you've likely had been advertised with these assets. I'll leave some links in the description in terms of ways that are the different asset packs that you can get online. Once I select, I'll go through Eagle Software and I'll select the different assets I want to add to the project in terms of the composition. And I will then add that to the project. So I will overlay them onto the finished edit. And in this video, I added different burns and different film kind of assets that kind of gave it this vintage look. And typically when I'm adding these assets is I'm going to create, what I might do is I would put an adjustment layer above the assets. And in this video, again, what I use is Magic Bullet has a film plugin. So I added that to the adjustment layer above the different assets I added from Eagle Software. And that way it tends to allow it to blend more into the image. So when you add the film plugin, it allows you to add different film stocks to the image. And that way it blends into the assets as well, so that it really complements the video. So if it's a little more artificial, too sharp, it might not look natural. This way it allows you to have a bit of blending so that it fits more in the film and in the composition. And there's just different ways to cut the assets. I don't think you want to overdo it. I tend to lower the adjustment from 100% to typically 40 to 60%, depending on how it looks to my eye. And yeah, using so you can use different types of film stock. There's different ways to create film emulation using the film plugin from Maxon One. There are other emulation software or plugins out there. So there's one like Dehancer Pro is a pretty good, well-known one. But because I'm using Magic Bullet and Maxon One already, I just decide to kind of keep it within the suite. And yeah, that's what I do is then I'll add the assets. In this video, I added some cuts to the assets so it's not overpowering the video, as I really want it to complement the shot and not distract. In this video, I walk through different aspects of my post-production workflow, and particularly how I shot this video for Instagram with 2 models at the CNE here in Toronto. And then I talked about how I add usually 4 to 5 adjustment layers and use Magic Bullet looks as well as Mojo and Renoiser to get the best image, and how use Colorista to create a LUT so that you can convert from a flat to a Rec 709 color space. And then I talked about using Eagle Software and adding assets from Eagle Software so that you can quickly surface your assets and view them, and then drag and drop them into your timeline. In this case, I use Final Cut Pro. And then from there, I talked a bit about how I tried to blend the assets more into the image using the film stock from Magic Bullet's film. So if you like this video, I would appreciate a like and subscribe, and I hope it was very helpful and you picked up some tips for your post-production workflow. Thanks and have a great day.